The Consumer Justice Alliance was formed to fight government proposals which represent the most seismic shift in civil litigation in living memory, and which will have a fundamental impact on two of the most basic legal principles. That anyone who has been injured through no fault of their own should be able to have access to justice irrespective of their means, and that a person injured by someone else's negligence is entitled, as near as is possible, to be put back into the financial position he or she was in prior to the accident. The government's sweeping draconian changes will introduce an untried and untested system which will erode these two fundamental principles. Chairman of the Consumer Justice Alliance, Nigel Muirs-Raby, explains why the campaign is so important.
We represent injured people. We recognised when the proposals were first put forward that they were going to be very badly affected by this, and we felt they needed a voice which wasn't available to them through other organisations.
What would these government proposals mean?
Well, we're concerned that they're going to restrict their access to justice. And it's very important that if you have suffered an injury, you're able to get proper legal advice.
What's the current situation?
At the moment, if awarded compensation, they're able to keep their full awards. Under the proposals that are coming forward, they're going to lose a part of that. Now, that's not fair, because as it stands at the moment, you're awarded your compensation on the basis that it gets you back into the position financially you were in as near as possible prior to the accident.
The government claims its proposals will cut public expenditure.
Of course, we understand the government wants to try and reduce public expenditure, but the point here is that these proposals won't do that. All they'll actually do is to shift the burden from the insurance company to the injured victim, and that's totally unfair.
The Consumer Justice Alliance is made up of representatives of charities, injured victims groups and others, all of whom feel the need to act against the potentially serious implications of the government's recommendations. We spoke to some of those injured people who would have lost out if they had tried to make a claim under the government's proposals.
Well, I became ill at the beginning of the year. I had a sort of breathlessness problem. Went to the doctor and they sent me for x-ray, and it showed I had a lot of water on my lung, and they didn't know why. Went into the hospital and they did lots of tests on me and they couldn't see why. And they sent me then across for invasive surgery into the lungs to find out what it was, and it was diagnosed as mesothelioma.
I've been asked to give a short presentation. We unfortunately were the victims of a clinical negligence back in 2004. My husband, he suffered from pneumonia and a heart condition and went into the local hospital, Frimley Park, where he was subsequently discharged and readmitted and subsequently discharged again. They failed to note that he had a heart condition during all the admissions. The result was he had a serious stroke at just 39, and he was also a father of 3 young children who were 4, 6 and 9 years of age. That night we had the horror of actually going to say goodbye to him in intensive care because they didn't think he would make the night.
It was a work-related injury, and I lost my finger on a crosscut saw that was faulty. It didn't return far enough, so it left the blade exposed, and when I went to turn it off, the finger hit my blade.
This is, I think, is one of the appalling things about mesothelioma, in that my husband Jeff was a very, very fit and able in every way man, so there was no prior warning. You had no warning that something that you contracted 35 years ago is suddenly going to come up and bite you in the neck and say, you're now under a death sentence, which basically it is incurable and it is terminal.
Well, I was a night shift, working on a night shift. I was working on a lathe at the time. I'd taken a part off a machine and it needed cleaning up. It was rusty, dirty, needed cleaning up. So I took the parts back to the workshop and used the lathe to clean it up. I was using some emery cloth to polish this bar at high speed, and next minute somehow my hand gets caught. At the time, I didn't know I'd lost them. It was all a bit of a mess, and I covered it in cloth so I couldn't see it, but I say my hand was hanging down. We ripped the bone ripped through the skin there and across there, and the hand was hanging, well, worse than that, but hanging down on this flap here.
All of these injured people sought compensation through a no-win, no-fee arrangement. Here they tell their experiences and views of the government proposals.
I was out of work for 2.5 years because of the injury, obviously physiotherapy, operations. It helped a lot in my day-to-day expenses, the money I had to pay back. Obviously with council tax, sickness benefit and housing benefit, all that had to be paid back, which was £15,000. If I hadn't have got that compensation and the physio and all the help that came with it, I wouldn't be back at work. I wouldn't be able to use my hand. There's nothing I could do. I could not afford, even though they actually admitted liability, I personally would not have been able to afford to take them to court. Just on the off chance that it was against me and then I've got to pay the costs for both sides, and you know, I mean, it would have been impossible. Would have been impossible for someone in a situation where they hurt themselves as bad as I did, and they can't work for 2.5 years, and it's just doesn't bear thinking about. I basically would have been bankrupt. Would have been bankrupt over this if, you know, I hadn't been helped the way I was.
We feel that the new law would have a devastating effect on those people like us who find it difficult to cope with the situation they're put in. It is so hard, you feel so isolated and alone because this doesn't happen to general people. If the law goes onto the statute books, people like us will no longer be able to recover the cost of the insurance or solicitor's fees, and instead will have to pay out of any damages we receive. The impact this law will have is going to be huge. We will be restricted and deprived of justice. As a result, there may well be instances of those people, the victims, who need compensation and will miss out the most. The compensation has allowed us to turn our life around. Colin, he did nothing wrong. He got a virus. He was unlucky and the hospital did very little to diagnose it. But with these damages, we have adapted our home, and most importantly, we have access to 24-hour care 7 days a week, which means that the girls can have a normal life and they don't have to be left to look after their father. Colin's story shows how important access to justice is for people suffering the devastating effects of negligent medical care. Changing the funding regime will make it harder for people like Colin to have their claims properly investigated, and also for the hospital to change what practices allow this to happen and deny them full compensation for the loss they have suffered.
There are so many people out there in Jeff's situation who, being given the information, this could cost you, are just going to say, absolutely no way.
It seems to me that these people who want to get it changed, they don't really know the story, full story. But it certainly helped me a lot, not only with the compensation, but with the physio as well. So it's not just the compensation claim, it's everything. And they talk you through it, they help you, they were very helpful to me. And leave it alone, as far as I'm concerned.
As part of its campaign to try to stop the government's proposals, the Consumer Justice Alliance hosted a reception in Parliament so that parliamentarians could hear first-hand from those who would be most affected by the proposals.
We regard it as absolutely fundamentally important. Not that the government is wrong in wanting to tackle abuse. We simply say that they're going the wrong way about it. What we have got in the body of the bill now, particularly sections 41 and 43 of the bill, is something which we believe is fundamentally unfair because it changes the balance between victims and wrongdoers.
This is the message we must get across. We have to make parliamentarians understand what the effect of this is. This isn't a compensation culture, this isn't ambulance chasing, these are real people who are real victims of injuries that are not their fault, and we've got to do everything we can to make sure that this dreadful new legislation doesn't end up on the statute book.
I would not have had enough money myself personally to survive after my obviously payout on the laws, but now, I mean, the people that are coming, if someone had got injured like I got injured, they'll receive 25% less than I received. And basically, no one's going to be able to survive on it. It's not on a wand or a compensation, it's basically putting you back to the footing you was on. It's not a freebie.